In 1847, a whaling ship left New Bedford, her crew ready for a long season in the North Atlantic. At first, the voyage was ordinary. Sails trimmed, casks counted, harpoons sharpened. But soon, the sea began to show its secrets. A calf surfaced with strange wounds. Light stirred under the hull at night. Lines came back from the water, burnished with marks no man could explain. The crew tried to keep order, but the ocean had other plans. Something vast was rising from the depths, and the ship would not return the same. So, before we continue, please make sure you subscribe and leave a like to support the channel. Thanks. We cleared New Bedford in late spring with a steady wind off the land and a pale sky that promised a clean run to the Grand Banks. The ship was steeled Batross, stout in the hull and heavy in the bows from years of hard service. The trillworks were scrubbed and banked. The boats hung tight in the cranes, and the decks smelled of oak, salt, and old oil. I was in my 3rd year before the mast and kept the noon sights and the night entries, when the mate's eyes were on other work. The crew is a mix from many coasts. Captain Bowen had broad shoulders, gray at the temples, and a voice that held its weight without strain. Mr. Reed, our first mate, kept the watches with a habit of short questions and quick checks of gear. Luis, an Azorian harpooner, ran a whetstone over iron every morning and spoke little unless it mattered. King, our boat steerer, moved with calm care and had a way of speaking that eased quarrels. Sutter did not know how to be still and boasted more than he should. Daly, the cooper, said little and noticed everything. Esteban the cook kept the galley hot and clean and made sure we never missed a meal. The sea cut sharp and cold as wettest east of Nantucket shores. We took a school of pilot fish on the 3rd day and dried the racks of cod that came up in the morning lines. The work kept our hands warm and our backs steady. Lines were coiled in their tubs and greased. Oarses were checked for splits. Thole pins were placed. Mast steps measured for looseness. The captain inspected Thesper heads for the irons and laid a hand on each boat's keel to feel for any give. He did not speak about luck or a man. He counted casks and checked lashings. By the time we reached the banks, a low fog sat on the water beneath and lifted at dusk. We took soundings and marked the day's run with the slate. Birds came and went in large numbers, feeding at the edges where the current pulled 2 ways. The crew settled into the order of watch and rest. Reed kept me on the dog watch for a week, and then set me on nights with King. I liked the night air and the clear steps of a routine that did not change without cause. We waited for whales and the signal that would set the boats down. On the 6th day past the banks, we saw the first sign that did not fit. A gray cowright whale surfaced off our port side at a distance of 3 cables rolling in a slow motion that showed its flank. The hide bore a ring of round wounds, evenly spaced, each set deep and clean. They were not tooth marks from a shark, which leave torn edges and pulled skin. These were circular and smooth. The calf rolled again and dove without raising flukes, which struck me as wrong for a healthy animal. Luis watched from the main chains with his glass and did not speak. When he came down, he washed the glass with fresh water and put it away without comment. That night, the wind fell off to a low breath that barely moved the sails. The sea was not flat, but the swell did not break. We lay mostly quiet except for the creak of rigging and the soft knock of blocks. On the middle watch, I stood with King by the lift. He pointed to a faint glow under the surface off the quarter, not large, moving with the set of the current. It was not the rolling light we see when the plankton bloom. It held a steady form for a time, then dimmed and brightened in a slow pulse, then drifted under the ship and out of sight. We said nothing to each other for a while. When spoke, he said only that currents carry many things. Morning brought wind again and a chop that slapped the... The captain changed course a few points north to clear a patch of fog that held to the horizon. Around noon, Esteban called from the galley and pointed off the bow. A patch of torn flesh floated there, large enough to fill a boat. The edges were smooth, not ragged. We hoed to and hooked it to bring it near. The flesh was pale and rubbery with long fibers that tore in strings. On one side, near the edge, a hard plate sat embedded at an angle. Daly pried at it with a marlin spike and freed it. It was dense and curved with a rough ridge. Luis ran his thumb along the edge and said beak. He had seen something like it once near File, he said, but not this large. We let the flesh drift away and cleaned the deck with seawater. The captain did not call it a sign or a warning. He ordered a careful check off lines and a fresh lash on every spare oar. He told me to mark the position in the log and to note the color and texture of the flesh. He had a way of staying with what he could see and touch. Reed followed his lead and kept the men close to work. Even Sutter quieted for a time and worked his splice with care. 2 days later, the wind veered and built through the afternoon. The sea changed shape and set from the northeast. We shortened sail and Redethi rise and fall, with the bow burying now and then. The pumps took their share of our time, though the hull stayed. In the green of the late day, we lowered for a pod of sperm whales on the weather side. They were good size, and moving steady. The boats hit the water clean, and we pulled hard into position. Luis stood ready with the iron anking, set the bow straight. We were near enough to smell the breath when the lead whale rolled aside and showed a torn dorsal with a deep ringed mark that ran from edge to edge. The whale sounded without a blow, and the pod changed heading in a scatter that felt like flight. I saw fear in those animals, not confusion, fear. The sea around us filled with oil streaks and bits of shredded tissue. We pulled for an hour and never closed again. Reed called us back at dusk and said we would not chase at night under those conditions. The mood on deck changed after that. Men spoke less about shares and more about repairs and watch orders. Deli moved his tools to the leeward side, where Heckled work in a crouch and not lose small pieces to a roll. Esteban cooked heavier meals and did not allow scrap stove sit on the stern gratings. King checked our lanterns twice each night and kept a new wick in reserve. The captain called a quiet word with each boat's crew and reviewed signals with Reed. He did not speak to us as children or fools. He spoke to us as men who needed clear rules for hard water. On the 9th night, after the first mark's onth calf, the sea eased again to a low heave. A line came taut against the hull on the starboard side without cause. Reed and I went to the rail and looked down with a lamp. A howler that we kept coiled and lashed to the rail had shifted and fed out through a chock. The free end hung in the water. The part by the hull bore a new wear. Not the rough scuff of a plank edge, but a set of round scars in a line pitted and polished. We hauled it up. The free end had been crushed and twisted until the inner fibers. The fibers were covered in a clear film, slick to the touch, and with a faint ammonia smell. Reed said nothing and carried the line to Daly. Daly scraped the film with Acnif and watched it bead and dry. He tied off the har in a new place and added a second lashing. At dawn, we saw a field of air bubbles lifting in slow bursts off the port bow. The bubbles kept a shape for a time and rose from a depth we could not sound. They followed us for half an hour and then fell away. Birds that had shadowed us for days turned wide and did not cross that patch. Luis watched the water as if reading a message and then put the glass away. The captain held a steady course, north by east. He had orders to fill casks and keep the owners happy, and he had a sense that our best chance sat along that belt of cold water. Still, has shifted the watches so that no man spent long alone on deck, and he kept the boats ready to drop in less than a minute if needed. He had us double the lashings on the rudder chains and check the pintles and gudgeons for cracks. Headed a second anchor watch on nights with low wind. My own thoughts changed in a way I did not say aloud. I had been to sea long enough to know the weight of hazard, but this felt different in shape. It did not feel like a gale orus or a leash shore. It felt like a set of movements around us that we could not chart. I wrote only what I could witness in the log and left out the parts that had no measure. On the 11th day past the banks, during the forenoon watch, we saw a mass ahead that at first passed for drift ice. It lay low in the water, and showed a pale surface with scars and long grooves. As we drew near, the thing shifted and rolled without a swell to push it. It was the body of a large esquid, larger than any I had seen. The mantle was torn open. The arms were missing beyond the base, cut clean. The head was crushed on one side, and the eye socket on that side was empty. In the other, the eye was clouded and glossy, and held its round shape, without life. The beak gaped and shut in the wash, not from intent, but from the motion of the water. We did not hook it. We passed within 2 ship lengths, and kept going. Sutter started to speak. Anton stopped. Reed told him to keep his place. The captain looked along, and then ordered the boats prepared to lower. Not to take the carcass, but to be ready for whatever hunted it. He did not dress his order in talk. He said only that no one wanted to be surprised. That afternoon, a light rain fell, and the wind backed again. We made small sail and ran slow. The pumps stayed quiet. The crew moved with a controlled pace, and no one wasted steps. Esteban sent up broth and dry biscuit to warm us. King checked the boat plugs and set spare oars within easy reach. Daly nailed to new chocks near the stern to keep lines from slipping overboard. The captain reviewed the signal gun and made sure the powder stayed dry. Near dusk, the lead line came up with a smear of clear jelly on the knots. It clung and stretched and left, a sting on the skin, when Reed brushed it away. He swore once under his breath, and washed his hands with seawater until the sting eased. Luis asked to see the line, and smelled it, without touching. He returned it, without commenting, stood in the bow, looking into the low light. His face held a tight focus I had not seen in him before. We did not see whales the next day. The sea sat under a high sky, and the swell ran long and even. The quiet held its own kind of fresher. When the ship creaked, men looked up from their work. When water slapped the hull, heads turned. No one spoke about it. The captain set a silent order for that day, and the deck answered it without friction. Reed corrected a lash here, a coil there, and kept his voice low. Toward evening, during my trick at the helm, the rudder shook in my hands in a way I had not felt. It was not the snap of a wave or the drag of weed. It was a steady pull-to port and then a release. The chains to the tiller strained and relaxed. The captain came to my side and laid a hand in the tiller. He felt it too. He looked at the wake and at the water under the stern. He said nothing, heckled for the lanterns to be set early and for the boats to be swung out in their cranes and left ready. He stood aft stern until full dark. Only then did he go below for a short time. I went off watch with my mind at a high pitch that did not ease with food or tea. I lay in my bunk and listened to the hull speak its usual language. It felt like waiting for a knock that might not come. When I slept, it was shallow and short. At midnight, King shook my shoulder and said to come on deck. His voice was calm, but his hand was firm. I pulled on my jacket and boots and climbed. The deck held a low blue light from the lamps, and the sky cleared enough to mark a few stars. Men stood at rails in silence, not in fear of noise, but because words did not offer any use. Reed pointed off the stern, behind us, at a distance hard to judge in the low light. A line of dim shapes rose and fell in a pattern. They were not waves. They were mounds, long and smooth, that lifted and sank without breaking. Each one pushed a small wake. Between them, the water boiled in short bursts that looked like air forced from depth. The shapes kept pace with Thesh. No one shouted. No one joked. The captain came up, took in the sight, and ordered the boat's plugs checked again, and the axes laid ready by each mast. He told King to load the signal gun, headed Reed to rig a second helm line in case the chains failed. He told me to stand by the log and measure our speed. We were making 3 knots on small sail. The shapes stayed with us. The early signs were past the point, off shrugging away. We were being followed. We could not say by what. We could say only that it was large, close, and the men held to their work. The officers kept orders clear. The ship moved forward into a night that did not carry sound far, and did not give answers. I set the log, marked the slate, and waited for the next thing to show itself. The shapes held with us until the watch changed. No voices raised, and no one left his place without live. The captain kept a steady course and small sail. At the second dog watch, he ordered coffee for all hands. Esteban moved quick and steady. The tin cups made small sounds against steggly rail that felt loud in the quiet. When I took my cup, he held my eye and gave a short nod. It helped more than heat. Near 2 bells, into the middle watch, the first hard contact came. It started as a rise under the stern. That lifted the rudder and then let it fall. The tiller jerked, and the helmsman's hands and the chains rang. The next lift came from the quarter. It rolled the ship a few degrees and set the boats to creaking in the cranes. Reed called foremen to the falls to steady the boats without lowering. We braced them with short lines to keep them from swinging. The rise came again, this time under the forefoot. The bow lifted and settled. The hull gave its deep sound that I had nae heard in heavy seas. This was not from sea. It was from force applied at depth. Louis took a boat hook and leaned over the lee rail when the water swelled near. He dipped the hook and raised it slow. Clear strands clung to the iron. He held it to his nose and then to mine. It smelled like the smear from the lead line. He wiped the hook with a rag Thoth threw overboard. His face did not change, but his jaw worked once. The captain ordered a drag out astern tow foul, anything that came close. Daly and I lashed 3 spare casts together with short chains and bent on a length of hawser with a grapple tied in at the last fathom. We checked the knot and eased it over the stern. The casts took the linian set behind us in the wake. The ship slowed a fraction. The mounds in the water adjusted and held pace. The drag swung once and then steadied. A low sound traveled through the hull. It was not a voice and not a knock. It wasped her shirt on and off like a hand against a door. The men looked down out of habit. There was nothing to see but the black water and the faint foam from the wake. The drag jerked. The hawser went taut. The stern dipped. Blocks groaned. Reed shouted for axes. Daly and I ran to the bitts. The whore thrummed under my palm. When I tested it, it felt like a lift. The stern post creaked. The captain gave the cut order. We chopped clean and let the whore run. It smoked in the rail and then went slack as the last turns whipped free. The casks vanished. The mounds dropped away for armament, then resumed their line. We stood with the axes and waited for the next pull. It did not come at once. The captain had king-fired the signal gun over the stern. The flash lit the water for a breath. In that light, I saw a pale shape turn just below the surface. It was not smooth like a whale. It held edges and lines that crossed like plates. The water closed. The sound rolled out and was gone. Dawn came slow and flat. A light haze lay on the water. The shapes of stern sank out of sight with the light. But the feeling of being paced did not lift. The captain collected hands and laid out a plan. Boats would not be lowered unless we saw whales that offered a clean chance. A stern guard would keep 2 men with axes at all hours. The rudder chains would be watched without pause. No lines would trail. No scraps would sit on deck. Sutter started to ask why we did not turn for home. Reed cut him off and say the ship would not run blind through water we could not read. The captain let that stand. By mid-morning, the sea showed new marks. Parallel tracks cut the surface off the port beam, each about a ship length, straight as I've drawn with a rule, then gone. We saw 4 sets at intervals. Birds flew across and rose again without pause. Luis watched with the glass, and finally said he did not know what made them. We worked on, but the work changed. Welloshed more than we usually did. We stowed twice. We checked the same fastenings again and again because no one trusted anything to stay where it should if left alone. The order helped. Order gives hands a place to go when minds circle. At noon, the log showed little ground made. The captain did not press more sail. He kept a margin heckled trust. He had me copy the last day's entries into a second book in case the first went overboard. He did decently in heavy weather or when risk felt close in another way. I understood what that meant. I wrote with care and did not let my hand shake. Early in the second dog watch, the water off the starboard quarter lifted and a column rose, not like a spout from a whale, but a thick surge that brought clear gel and finer bubbles to the surface. The smell hit us hard. It stung the eyes and the back of the throat. Esteban swore and pulled high sopran over his nose. The column fell and left patches that clung to the planks. We washed them with buckets. The gel did not break with one rinse. It smeared and needed the brush. Daly used a scraper on the worst spots. His forearms re-enedwered. The spray touched. Sutter would not go near the rail while we cleaned, he said. His back hurt and held his side like a man with a cracked rib. No one believed him. Reed told him to bring up fresh water, and he took twice the time needed. When he came back, he had not filled the buckets full. At sunset, the wind eased again. The captain ordered lanterns along both rails and the mastheads. He had King bring up the spare powder and shot, and set them in the cabin where there was no dam. He told me to rest 2 hours, and then returned to stand the midnight to 4 with him. I lay down in my clothes and did not sleep. When I came up at midnight, the water carried a faint glow under the starboard beam. It was wider than Theppel's we had seen on that first night. It moved with us and then crossed under to the last side and back again. The glow held a pattern, brighter in bands and darker between. It turned once, and the bands shifted like shutters. I could not say what made them. At 2 bells, the helm went light and then heavy. The ship's head fell off 2 points. The helmsman fought it, and then something hit the rudder with a solid blow. The tiller jumped, and the chain guard ripped free from one bolt. The captain shouted for men to the stern. King and I grabbed the spare helm line and threw it over tiller. We set it on the opposite cleat and hauled. The rudder came back a point. The hull shook once more from... Reed was already at the chains with the lantern. He peered over and pulled back as a pale arm rose and slapped Theplanks below the rail. It was not an arm like a man's arm. It was a length of flesh as wide as a man's chest, lined with round mouths that opened and closed. They found the hull and made a sound like wet leather when they took. The end of the arm was not in sight. Another length rose beside it and searched along the planks. It found a seam and pressed. Nails creaked. King raised an axe and struck down on the nearest round mouth. The blade bit and stuck. Clear fluid sprayed. The thing recoiled, and the axe tore free. More lengths rose, not fast, but with a They searched for purchase, found it, and pulled. The hull listed a degree as the starboard side took the strain. The boats and the cranes groaned. Reed shouted for men to the larboard falls to balance the roll. Men ran. No one froze. Daly came with a broad chisel and hammered at the nail heads near the grip of the mouths. When the nails gave, the mouths lost their bite and slid. We chipped and chopped. Clear fluid spread on the planks. It stung. Hands burned. We worked anyway. The captain ordered the tribworks lit. Esteban and I had them ready in minutes. He poured small oil, set kindling, and struck flame. Heat rose. Smoke ran along the deck and out to leeward. The glow threw hard light on the rail where the arms pressed. The flesh pulled back a foot from the heat. King saw it and shoot Ado keep the fires high. Esteban fed the flame with dry slats from a broken cask. The iron pots warmed red. The air grew hotter than any night on that voyage. Sweat ran into the stings on my wrists and made them burn more. The arm shifted their reach away from the trib works heat toward the stern. One found the lower part of the rudder and dropped twice. The tiller went solid in our hands. The ship lost steerage and yawed. The stern dropped. Water climbed the taffrail and slapped the deck. Men slid and caught cleats. The captain told King to bring the small bomb lance from the locker. We did not carry many. They were for whales, but this was not a usual night. King primed the lance, checked the fuse, and met the captain's eye. The captain nodded once. We tied a short line around King's waist, and 3 men took their places to hold him. He lay on the deck with his chest over the taffrail, aimed down past Theodore, and waited for the next lift. It came with a swell from below as the arm tightened, and the stern dipped again. He fired. The blast went off underwater. The sound hit the hull in our bodies as a heavy thump. The grip on the rudder loosened. The arm uncoiled in a rush and slid away. The water frothed with dark shapes turning. The mounds behind us broke form and scattered. The helm came back alive. The captain ordered hard to starboard to clear the cluster. Wagon to point. Then, too, the ship moved ahead into less troubled water. We kept the trilworks hot and the axes at hand until dawn. No more arms rose to the rail. The glow under the water moved away and then faded. The sun came up on a flat sea with a thin haze. The deck was marked with clear burns on the planks, torn nail heads, and streaks where the fluid had dried to a dull film. Our hands and forearms held small round burns that would turn to blisters by noon. The rudder chains showed new marks from the strain. The lower gudgeon had a fresh crack that daily circled with chalk. Sutter had not come to the rail during the worst of it. He had crouched by the main mast and prayed out loud in a long string under his breath. When Reed told him to stand and carry buckets, he moved as if he could not hear. After dawn, when the risk had lifted, he found his voice and argued that we should turn for west. Luce looked at him once and then looked away. The captain said we would make repairs and then decide course with a clear head. We spent the day in work that had to be done and could not be put off. We cooled the trilworks and cleaned Di and I drove new nails where the mouths had pulled old ones. Reed went over the standing rigging with a glass eye and found nothing new out of true. King cleaned the bomb lance gear, set aside the last 2 charges, and wrote Tethy count in chalk inside the locker. A stab in boiled cloths and fresh water, and treated our burns with a salve heccupped for galley scalds. It took the edge off. Near noon, we saw a line of oil to the north. It spread wide and lay steady. The captain set a cautious course toward it to see if whales were near. As we drew close, the oil thickened and carried small bits of white tissue and clear gel. The smell was strong. We did not see a whale. We saw a torn arm, pale and long, drifting on its own. The end was ragged, where the blast had cut it. The mouth still opened and closed without pattern. We watched it pass and did not try to bring it aboard. No one cheered. No one said, "The thing was over." The sea held its calm face, and the ship moved across it as if last night had not taken place. The men moved with care and did not waste words. The captain wrote in the log, closed the book, and told me to make a copy in this end. I did as told. I did not know what the next night would bring. I knew only that the shape of our voyage had changed, and that we were not done with what had found us. The arm we passed at noon did not drift alone. By mid-afternoon, gulls wheeled low and dove at pieces that floated with it. Some carried shreds in their beaks to drip and fight over in the air. The oil slick spread wider. We steered clear of the densest part. The men watched insolence. No one asked if the creature was dead. No one believed it. That night, we kept lanterns lit. Boat astern and posted double watch. The tree work stood ready with dry wood and small oil. King kept the bomb lance primed. Thoth captain said we would not fire unless pressed past choice. The sea lay steady. No swell, no chop. Every sound. I heard the scrape of DY's chisel 2 decks off as clear as if it was at my elbow. I heard the Lokoth stabbin' in the galley. I heard my own breath, louder than it should be. At 3 bells in the middle watch, Feglo returned. This time it came from both sides, not one. The bands of light were sharper, like lines crossing a They moved under the hull and stayed, not drifting past. The ship slowed through. The sails were full. The helm grew heavy again. The tiller did not jump, but pulled steady as if held. Reed ordered men to braces. The captain gave no order to alter course. He told us to hold and watch. Then came a sound from under the hull. It was not the thump of impact. It was a scrape that traveled along the planks from bow to stern, slow and even, the sound of something measuring us. The scrape stopped at the stern. The rudder chains tightened. Then a jolt ran through the-hole, and the stern dropped hard. The deck pitched. Men stumbled. Water washed the lee rail. A second jolt came. The boat slammed in their cranes. Reed shouted 4 lines to hold them down. The captain gave the cute order for the larboard boat. We let it fall to ease the strain. The boat hit the water and drifted astern. Weached. The glow shifted and rose. A length of pale arms surfaced under the boat and split it from keel to gunwale. The timbers snapped like kindling. The halves sank. The glow sank with them. We saw the churn of water and the scatter-off fragments. Then all stilled. The men at the rail cursed under breath. Louis stood silent. His hands stayed tight on the boat hook. Sutter muttered about leaving. He said it again and louder. Reed turned on him and told him to keep his mouth shut or be gagged. No one argued with Reed. At dawn, nothing showed astern. The sea ran flat. We had lost 1 boat, a small loss compared to the night, but it told us the thing could take what it wished. The captain gathered us on deck. He said, plain that we could not outpace it with sail, nor fight it in open water. He said, our best chance lay in shallower ground, where its bulk would have less room. He ordered a course west by north to reach shallows near the Flemish Cap. No one raised objection. The days that followed held steady wind. The ship made a fair speed. The crew worked as ordered, but moved with a quiet not common on a whir. Easthaben cooked plain food. Daly repaired what he could, and spoke little. Louise sharpened irons, though we had no whales to strike. Sutter brooded, but kept his mouth shut. King did his work with calm care, but I saw his eyes go to the stern each time he passed. On the 3rd night, from the wrecked boat, we heard a new sound. It was a knock from below, not at random, but in a pattern. 4 knocks, pause, 4 knocks, again. It traveled from bow to stern. The men froze. Reed gripped the rail. The captain said it was pressure on the planks. He told us to hold position and not answer with sound. We did as told. The knocks came a 3rd time, then ceased. By morning, the hull showed new weeps at the seams. Daly and I caulked them with oaken pitch. The water came in slow but steady. We kept the pumps going through the day. The men worked without complaint. None wanted to think what those knocks meant. On the 5th day, the wind dropped and we lay near still. The sea held long swells that moved under us without breaking. The sky dimmed at noon with a haze that did not. We stood watch with lanterns lit before sunset. At full dark, the glow came back. This time it circled. Bands of light moved around the hull in a wide ring. They pulsed bright and dim in rhythm. The ship rocked with pushes from bellows. The captain ordered all hands to stations. The tribworks fires flared high. Axes lay ready. The bombland stood primed. The glow tightened its ring. The water around us began to boil with rising air. A deep groan came from below, long and low, like timbers bent beyond their give. Then the first strike hit. The bow lifted 3 feet and men fell to their knees. Another strike came at the quarter. The rail split at one ston. Then arms rose more than before, pale and thick, reaching high over the deck. They searched, found rigging and pulled. Sails tore, blocks snapped. One arm wrapped the foremast and squeezed until the spar cracked with a sound like gunfire. The mast listed but held. Reed shouted for access to the fore. Men hacked at the arm. Clear fluid sprayed. The flesh quivered but did not lose. Luis grabbed a lance and drove it deep. The arm recoiled halfway but still clung. Another length swept across that. It struck Sutter, full, and threw him against the rail. His body broke the stanchion and went overboard. He did, not the captain shouted for the bomb lance. King took position by the taffrail again. He fired into the base of one arm that held the foremast. The blast shook the deck. The arm tore loose and thrashed across the deck before sliding back into the sea. Another length rose and wrapped the shattered rail. Luis and Reed cut at it together. The ship rolled hard to lar. Water poured over the rail. Barrels broke loose and slammed against the bow. The pumps were lost under water. Men scrambled to stay upright. Daly shouted that the seams were opening. The captain gave the order no one wanted to hear. He told us to cut the boats free and make for them. Hess said the ship would not hold. Reed repeated the order. Luis looked once at the captain and nodded. King cursed once under his breath and ran to his station. We slashed at the falls and dropped 2 boats clean. Men piled in. I went with King. Daly came after. Luis stayed with the captain and Reed to cut the 3rd boat. Esteban brought the powder box and tossed it in before climbing down. Arms still rose and fell around us. The glow lit the sea and bands. The ship groaned. I looked back once as our oars bit water. I saw the albatross roll to starboard, the broken form falling, the deck swarming with pale arms. The captain stood at the rail with a lance in hand. Reed shouted at men in the last boat. Then the ship heeled farther. Water rushed the deck. The glow flared bright, and the sea boiled. We pulled it hard into darkness with the glow behind us. We did not look back again. We rowed until our arms shook. The glow behind us faded, but the sea still moved in a churn that carried far. No one spoke above breath. The night air burned our throats from the fumes of oil and smoke. When dawn came, the horizon showed clear in every direction. No sail, no mast, no wreckage. The albatross was gone. We had 2 boats with 7 men between them. King steered one, Red the other. Esteban clutched the powder box, though the charges were soaked and near useless. Daly kept the water breaker tight between his knees. Luis sat silent in Reed's boat with his harpoon across his lap. His eyes never left the sea. We rigged a short sail from spare cloth and bent it to the mast. The wind gave us slow headway west. Reed kept the 2 boats close and set a course he said would bring us toward the cap if the wind held. We shared water and the biscuit was damp, but enough to keep us upright. By the 2nd day, adrift. The men's hands blistered from salt and rope. Esteban's voice cracked from thirst, though he said nothing of it. King kept steady at the tiller, his fists set and calm. I could not read. Daly counted the biscuit pieces twice and wrapped them in cloth against spray. It took sights at noon with the spare glass and tried to reckon our run. The math gave me little comfort. On the 3rd night, the glow returned, fainter, farther. But there, bands of pale light moved under the surface behind us. Reed cursed once and told us to keep rowing, keep the sails taut, make west while we could. Luis lifted his harpoon and Seth point on his knee. He did not move again that night. The glow followed until dawn, then sank out of sight. The men's nerves frayed. Esteban muttered prayers under his breath. Daly asked Reed if we should jettison weight to gain speed. Reed told him nothing we carried would change the outcome. King said we would not throw away food or water. Esteban glared, but held his tongue. On the 5th day, the sea changed color at noon. Patches of oil drifted on the surface. Birds gathered in numbers and dove. We pulled clear of the worst of it, but the smell clung. The sky dimmed with haze by evening. The glow came again that night, closer this time. Reed set the 2 boats apart. saying if it took one, the other might run. We did not argue. I rowed until my shoulders burned. My palms bled from thir handles. When I looked back, I saw the glow split into two shapes. They circled and crossed under us. Reed shouted for quiet. We held still. The water boiled once at our stern, then eased. The glow drifted away into thin. The seventh day brought a gale from the northwest. The sea built high and steep. The boats pitched ends. We tied ourselves in with spare line. Reed's boat vanished in the spray more than once, then reappeared. At dusk, we lost sight of them. Our small sail split. We cut it free and lay on. Rain blinded us, and the sea beat at the gunwales. By dawn, the gale had passed, but Reed's boat was gone. We were four now: King, Daly, Esteban, Andy. The water breaker was half empty. The biscuit bag near gone. The powder box was soaked through and useless. The harpoon was lost overboard in the night. We rowed west with bare strength. On then nth day, Esteban began to rave. He said the glow was under us, said he felt it through the planks. He rocked and shouted until King struck him once to quiet him. He sat still after that, but muttered to himself. Daly kept his eyes in the horizon. He did not look down. At midnight, the glow rose again. It circled slow, not fast. The water heaved under the boat, but did not strike. King told us to hold still. We sat frozen as the glow moved under us, then away. It lingered at the edge of sight until dawn. By the 12th day, we were spent. DY's hands bled from the pump. Thought there was little water left to bail. Esteban lay still, breathing shallow. King still held the tiller, though there was no sail to steer. I marked the sun, and guessed we were not far from the banks. On the 13th morning, a sail showed on the western horizon. We pulled the last of our strength to close the gap. The ship was the Marguerite out of Nantucket. They took us aboard, gaunt and burned, more bones than men. Daly wept when he touched the deck. King thanked the mate and asked for water. Esteban died before noon. We gave him tough sea, without words. I told the captain of the Marguerite what we had seen. He listened, his face unreadable, then said, "Men see much in hunger and fear." He wrote that we had lost the Albatross to a storm. I did not argue. He made my entries in the book. I kept hidden and closed it. Luis, Reed, Bowen, and the rest were gone with the ship. A few lived, but the cost stayed. When I close my eyes at night, I see the bands of light under the hull and feel the grip on the planks. I do not know if we escaped or were spared. The sea does not answer. In 1847, a whaling vessel sailed out of New Bedford. Her crew braced for a long hunt in the North Atlantic. At the start, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The sails were properly trimmed, the casks carefully counted, and every iron sharpened for the season ahead. But the ocean soon began revealing signs that didn't belong to any sailor's understanding. A young whale rose beside us, bearing strange, circular wounds. At night, faint light shifted beneath the hull, and by morning the lines we cast came up scorched with patterns no man aboard could name. The crew tried to keep to routine, yet the sea had other intentions. Something immense was pushing up from the black water, and the Albatross would not return as she left. Before we go any further, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like to support the channel. Thank you. We departed New Bedford in early spring, the wind drifting off the coast and a thin sky suggesting a clean passage to the Grand Banks. The Albatross was an old, dependable ship, broad of frame and heavy at the bow after years of hard duty. The trillworks were scrubbed, the boats hung steady in their davits, and the deck carried its usual mix of oak, salt, and the lingering smell of oil. I was in my 3rd year before the mast, keeping noon readings and the night entries whenever the mate was occupied elsewhere. Our men came from half a dozen coasts. Captain Bowen, a square-shouldered man with gray brushing his temples, rarely raised his voice but never had to. Reed, the first mate, managed the watches with sharp questions and quick checks of gear. Luis, the Azorian harpooner, put his whetstone to iron each morning, speaking only when he felt his words mattered. King, the boat steerer, moved with slow confidence and had a calm way of settling arguments. Sutter talked more than sense aloud, while Daly the cooper observed everything in silence. Esteban kept the galley warm and spotless, making sure no man missed a meal. The sea cut cold as we passed east of Nantucket. On our third day out, we brought in a string of pilot fish and hung racks of cod to dry. Work filled our hours coiling lines, checking splices, greasing tubs. Daly inspected the oars, replaced thole pins, and measured each mast step. The captain looked over every spare harpoon head, resting his palm on each boat keel to feel for weakness. He never spoke of omens, only cask slashings, and what could be proven with the hand. By the time we reached the banks, noon fog thickened into a wall and faded only at dusk. We took soundings, marked our run, and watched the birds feeding where two currents met. The watches settled into rhythm. Reed placed me on dog watch a week, then shifted me to nights with King. I preferred the dark hours' steady work. No surprises unless the sea chose to give them. We waited for the cry that would put the boats down. 6 days past the banks, we saw the first thing that broke the pattern. A gray calf surfaced off the port bow, slow rolling to show its flank. Its hide bore a ring of perfectly round punctures, each deep and smooth, unlike shark bites that tear the skin. The calf slipped under without lifting its flukesrong for a healthy whale. Louis studied it from the chains with his spyglass, climbed down, washed the lens, and said nothing. That night the wind weakened to almost nothing. The swell moved, but never broke, and the ship lay quiet except for the creak of rigging. On middle watch, King touched my arm and pointed aft. A faint glow shifted beneath the surface, drifting with the current. It wasn't the soft bloom of plankton. This light held its shape, pulsed slowly, then faded beneath the hull. We didn't speak for several minutes. When he finally did, he only said that currents often carry strange things. Morning brought a new wind and a choppy slap at the bow. The captain altered course a few points north to skirt a wall of fog. Around midday, Esteban pointed toward the bow, where a slab of torn flesh floated big enough to fill a whaleboat. The cut edges were smooth. We hauled it in. The tissue was pale, rubbery, strung with long fibers. Embedded near one end was a curved, ridged plate. Daly pried it loose. Luis ran his thumb along the edge and murmured bake. He'd seen something similar in file never one this size. We let the mast drift and scrubbed the deck. The captain gave no talk of warnings. Instead, he ordered every spare, or lashed anew, every line examined. I logged the position and description. Even Sutter kept quiet. 2 days later, the wind swung around and built hard. The sea rose from the northeast, and we shortened sail. Pumps kept steady rhythm though the hull stayed tight. As evening turned green, we lowered for a pod of sperm whales to windward. We pulled close enough to smell their breath when the lead bull rolled aside, showing a mangled dorsal fin with deep ringed marks running across it. The whale plunged without blowing, and the pod scattered, not confused, but frightened. Oil streaked the surface, bits of flesh drifting among us. We rowed an hour, and never regained distance. Reed called us back before dark, unwilling to chase in such water. After that, the ship changed. Men talked less of shares, and more of gear. Daly shifted his tools to the lee side to keep them safe during rolls. Esteban cooked heavier meals and kept the stern gratings spotless. King checked lanterns twice nightly. The captain quietly reviewed signals with each boat crew. He spoke plainly, no fear-mongering, but no illusions either. 9 nights after spotting the calf, a line scraped taut along the starboard hull. Reed and I leaned over with a lamp. A hawser, that had been coiled and lashed securely, had somehow fed itself through a chock. The section near the hull, carried a neat row of small round pits, polished smooth. We hauled it. Aboard, the free end was crushed and twisted, its inner fibers shredded and coated with a clear, slick substance, smelling faintly of ammonia. Reed carried it straight to Daly, who scraped it and watched it dry to a dull film. The line was moved and lashed twice over. At dawn, clusters of bubbles rose off the port bow, rising in slow bursts from a depth we couldn't measure. They followed us half an hour, then slipped away. Birds that had shadowed our wake turned wide and avoided that patch of sea. Luis lowered his glass and stared as if weighing something he couldn't say. The captain kept our heading north-based, driven by orders to fill the casks along that cold water belt. Still, he doubled the anchor watch on calm nights, reinforced the rudder chains, and checked the pintles and gudgeons himself. No man was left alone on deck more than a short spell. My own thoughts shifted. This didn't feel like storm weather danger or drifting ice. It felt like deliberate motion around us, patterns we couldn't chart. In the log, I wrote only what I saw and left out what couldn't be measured. 11 days past the banks. During the forenoon watch, we sighted what looked like drift ice. The mass floated low, pale, carved with long grooves. As we neared, it rolled on its own a wave, prompting it. It was the body of a giant squid, larger than any I had known. The mantle was split open, the arms severed clean near the base, the head crushed on one side. One eye socket was empty. The other held a cloudy sphere still intact. The beak opened and shut with the wash of water. We passed 2 ship lengths off. Sutter began to speak, but Reed silenced him. The captain ordered boats ready not to take the carcass, but to stand prepared for whatever had killed it. He gave the command without ornament.